Hi, my name is Graham Boyack and I'm Director of Scottish Mediation, and this is a presentation on mediation skills for planners for partners in planning. Although I'm not a planner, both my father and sister were, so I have some idea about the profession. That knowledge, and also what I've observed by working with organisations like the RTPI and PAS, is that mediation skills are a good fit for planners, particularly because of their role with the public and with developers. The aims of this session are to outline the key skills of mediation, understand the contexts where planners might use them, and to understand how planners gain and then maintain those skills. A bit of background first. Mediation in planning has been talked about for a while. Much of that focus has been on the use of formal mediation. For me, it's just as important to look at how the skills can be deployed, and that for me is consistent with the recent developments with the publishing of the Community Empowerment Act and in the discussions around the new planning bill. This may look a long list. However, when we examine them in themselves, I would argue that all the skills listed here are not difficult skills. One of the key points I learned when I did my mediation course was the need to keep everything consistent with who I am. Active listening. The idea of active listening is that you're able to reflect back what people are saying, ask questions to explore what's said, and the use of phrases such as "I hear" and "you've said" are particularly important when using this skill. Open questioning. Avoiding questions that lead to a yes or a no answer. Key phrases to use would be things like, "Tell me a bit more," "How did that make you feel?" so that you're not simply engendering a one-word answer from people. Positions and interests. It's actually important to be able to get beneath what somebody's initial position is. So an objection to a big development might be a position, but the interest may be about construction concerns, such as noise and disruption. By asking questions which aim to probe this, you can often find that underneath the position, there's an interest that people are actually really more concerned about, and it's something that planners might be able to address. One of the other skills which is very important with mediation skills is that of reframing. It's used as part of active listening, and the idea is that you can take the toxicity out of a comment that somebody makes when you reflect it back to them. It's sort of like the graphic that's on the screen. Somebody's either half full or half empty, and there are different ways that you can get them to think about things as being half full. People often don't recognise that the way that their body language is working is a key part of how people perceive what they're saying. And if you look at the statistics, something like 65% of the communication that you give is non-verbal. And therefore it's important that you look at the different aspects of that communication to make sure that A, they're consistent with what you're saying, and B, that they're demonstrating that you're actually listening to the person that you're speaking to. A key part of mediation skills is also reality testing. For planners, this might be helping to show applicants or the general public about the scope of planning and how the process works. Often people might have an unrealistic expectation of what they can do, and sometimes by giving them such information and testing their understanding of that, you can help them to be able to engage better with the system. Another aspect of mediation skills is that often simply speaking to people and engaging in a conversation isn't enough. And so using additional tools, whether they be a flip chart, a picture, are very important because people often need something visual, both to help clarify their thoughts and also to understand arguments that others might be putting forward. One of the most difficult parts of mediation skills that I certainly have encountered is the use of what we call pausing. Humans often feel the need to fill a space, and in doing so, you can often prevent somebody from being heard. So if I'm the person who's engaging in a conversation with somebody else, it's really important that I give the other person time to be able to say something. And often, because a pause can be quite uncomfortable, it can be a good technique to get somebody to actually engage in the conversation and say something, because there's only so much time that people will allow that dead space to exist. The final part of the mediation skills, which is important, is that of managing the process. All of the above skills are good in themselves and valuable skills in themselves, but it's the combination of how you pull them together which is very important. That can range from a situation where you might have a formal mediation, where you have party A, party B, and a mediator who's facilitating the conversation, but they're equally applicable in thinking about how a conversation's going, even on a one-to-one basis. In terms of the formal process, the Guide to the Use of Mediation in the Planning System, which was published by the government in March 2009, gives us some good pointers in terms of how we use it in a formal sense. And some of the aspects that are brought out in that quote I think are quite important. And that is that you're not necessarily going to get a complete result from a mediation all the time. Sometimes it will help you to narrow the scope of a dispute. And sometimes it simply allows people to become better informed and for more cost-effective outcomes. As I said, the formal process is very important. However, I do think there are other situations where there are good opportunities to use mediation, which may use both a formal and an informal method of conversation. I've highlighted some of them on the slide, and it's probably worth talking about some of them. One would be where an application is about to be made and you've been in a conversation with a developer. Mediation in this area could be important because it might allow a conversation which would mean that the application being submitted is actually better informed and has been based on conversations where concerns could have been raised at the very outset. Areas such as, say, gypsy traveller accommodation issues are also, I think, very applicable for the use of mediation. Often you might have highly emotional people who have very strong opinions, and so it might be necessary to use both the skills of mediation in terms of managing that conversation and or somebody who's independent to be able to chair such discussions. Development plans are a central part of the new planning bill, and the ability for planners to be involved in facilitating conversations with communities about how they would like to see their area develop, I think, are very important and a very positive use of mediation skills. And perhaps the final one I'll touch on in the ones I've listed here would be that of renewable energy applications. When we initially spoke to planners about the use of mediation skills, this was an area that came up very strongly. And what people felt was that often the type of consultation that people had been involved in didn't actually engage people in the community about what they'd like to see. It was simply more a sales job for how many wind turbines might be put into their area. And so taking a more mediative approach, I think, would be very positive in these areas, because people would then have an understanding that their views were going to be taken into account and they were not simply being sold something that they may not want. A key area for me is how you use mediation on a day-to-day basis. When I did my mediation course 6 years ago, one of my immediate thoughts was, I wish I'd done this course 20 years ago. And there's a number of areas where I think the skills of mediation are very useful on a day-to-day basis. In your dealing with the public, one of the things that you can do by using active listening skills and good questioning skills are to be able to better understand why a member of the public is engaging with you, so that you then have an opportunity to explore the issues with them better. It might also be really useful in terms of dealing with developers, because certainly my understanding of the planning system is that sometimes developers will come with a plan which is in excess of what they actually need in order to get to a place for something that they really want. And being able to understand that through a more positive discussion would be, I think, something useful. An area which I find to be useful for my mediation skills is where I'm working across organisations and bringing organisations together and being able to hold different organisations within the one conversation and be able to manage that conversation is a really positive skill to be able to have, because it, I think, leads to a better level of collaboration between organisations. I've also found that on a one-to-one basis, when I'm managing my employees, that issues such as appraisals become more straightforward because I'm much more attuned to what I'm hearing rather than simply deciding how I'm going to tell somebody that I want them to do their job. It becomes a much more interactive process. And I would say the same goes for dealing with people more senior to me in my organisation, such as managers and directors. Often, using the skills of mediation, I'm able to use particularly active listening and questioning to be able to get a better relationship and a better understanding of what it is that they want A, the organisation to do, and B, from my part in the organisation to help fulfil that. So how do you get these skills? One of the key areas to do this is on short courses. And I know that there are opportunities with organisations like PAS where you do volunteering that they might actually help skill you up in some of the skills of mediation. There are also a number of short courses run by a range of organisations in Scotland. At Scottish Mediation, we have a register of mediators, and in order to get on that register, you have to have completed 40 hours of mediation training, which has to include a certain amount of role play, a degree of examination, and then some textbook theory on how mediation operates. There are a number of different providers on how you can achieve that. Some are simply over a 5-day period, whereas others, such as the MScs, diplomas and certificates available at universities, can be done over a whole year. I personally think that one of the ways that planners should learn about mediation skills would actually be in their diploma, because it makes sense to me that if it's a skill which will help planners do their job, then it would actually be a good thing to introduce into the basic planning education. So once you've got these skills, how do you maintain them? One of the ways to do that is to practice mediation, but I would acknowledge that that's more difficult to do because the amount of formal mediations available in Scotland just now is not huge. And so I think one of the key things is to be able to practice the skills. And one of the ways you can do this and then reflect on it is by going to things like CPD and seminars where you can share with other people how you've tried to use the skills, how that's worked, and learn from them in terms of how they've done it, and then share experiences. There are some options to be able to practice mediation on a volunteer basis in Scotland, and they're usually centred around practising in the sheriff court on simple procedure cases. That's something I do, and I find that extremely valuable because it gives me a real insight into mediation in practice, and it also gives me an opportunity to hone my skills and to become a better mediator. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.